Hello and welcome to Motorsport Speak, the motorsport podcast brought to you by Motorsport Week and motorsportmonday.com. My name's Dan Lawrence, and as ever to talk all things Formula One, I'm joined by our editor Taylor Powling. Formula One has just come off the back of a sunny and successful weekend in Miami, which looked like it was going to be another Max Verstappen walkover, but instead a resurgent McLaren and Lando Norris enabled the British driver to get his maiden win at the 110th time of asking. So we're going to be speaking all about it. Taylor, first of all, how are you and did you enjoy the race?
Hi Dan, I'm very well, thank you. We had a great time out in Miami and it was probably the best Miami Grand Prix we've had, both from an event perspective, from what we've been told from people who have been to all three of the Grand Prix there, and from a racing point of view. It did look, as you say, like another Max Verstappen processional win that we've had in the last 2 years, although both years he did have a bit of a challenge, 2022 from Leclerc and 2023 coming through the field. You always had that kind of inevitability around Verstappen winning in Miami, and it looked the same when he qualified on pole and led the opening stint, but uncharacteristic mistake, hitting the bollard, getting floor damage, opened the door for Lando Norris, who had blistering pace throughout the race and capitalised on a mid-race safety car to earn his fully deserved maiden victory.
Yes, so let's get into McLaren, because it was very interesting because they had a very big upgrade package, particularly on Norris's car. I think there was 10 changes that they brought to the car, and Piastri had a sort of upgrade light, so he had a half and half. And the pace from McLaren was there from the outset, which I think sort of, I guess, and the pace itself wasn't getting realised until the most important moment of the weekend. We had the sprint qualifying where Lando was looking like odds on for pole, but then in a very peculiar qualifying session where the pace was dropping off as the session wore on and the softs didn't engage anywhere near as well as the mediums, Norris just couldn't string it together in the final qualifying session, so he ended up ninth on the grid for the sprint. And then in the sprint itself, he was caught out in that sort of melee between Hamilton, Alonso and Stroll, so he ended up not making it past turn one. But then all that changed in the race, and I think the most remarkable thing for me is obviously he benefited from the safety car because his qualifying didn't go 100% again, so he was sort of out of position from the start in terms of what his pace promised. But the safety car benefited him hugely and he came out ahead. And I think you and myself and probably a lot of other people thought that Verstappen was probably going to just, get past him at the restart and clear off into the distance. But instead, what happened is that Norris held his own at the restart and then just pumped in lap after lap that just eked out this advantage. And he ended up winning by several seconds. And Verstappen conceded defeat, which I think we haven't seen a race like that, I don't think, since 2022 when the Ferrari was on a par with the Red Bull. Since then, and like basically the entirety of last year, Verstappen basically could win at, with ease. And the only race where he couldn't was Singapore. And then the only race where he couldn't this year was when he didn't finish. But that just wasn't the case. Norris and the McLaren, after that safety car restart, was the fastest car. And it was very, very nice, I think, to see him finally break his no-wins tag. All the drivers were congratulating him. All the other teams were congratulating him. It was a very well-received Grand Prix win.
Yeah, I think it speaks volumes to, how appreciated Norris' talent is and what he's like as a guy, that all the drivers are so happy for him, and it was well deserved. I mean, as Sainz said, where you don't have the best car, you do need that luck, and Red Bull and Verstappen have been the dominant package, so it was always going to take a slice of luck for Norris to get his win before McLaren are ready to be genuine title contenders. And if you look at his history and the race that he could have won, the standout, he mentioned it as well in his press conference, Sochi 2021, without the rain coming down, he'd have probably won that race. You could put, fair enough, McLaren and Norris together. They didn't make the right call in those conditions, and Mercedes did. But you could count that as bad luck in the same way that this was good luck. And to be honest, Andrea Stella said McLaren were in a good position to fight for the win even without the safety car. And although overtaking was difficult, dirty air was quite a problem this weekend. Leclerc said between 1.5, 1.8 seconds you were feeling it, so it was increasingly hard to get into the DRS range. Norris would have had such an offset on tyres at the end, and his pace was so good on those warm mediums. If that translated to the hard tyres, with Verstappen's damage, I don't think anyone would have had an answer to him. So I think this, using the safety car argument as saying it's like a fluke win, a cheap win, that takes away from how good Norris's drive was and how good his race pace was in the first place.
Yeah, I agree. And I think Oscar Piastri's showing at the end of the race kind of maybe backs up Stella's argument, because obviously Piastri, who could have been himself, if it wasn't for the safety car, he could have been in contention for the win, because obviously he pitted just before it from the lead at the time. So he was trying to get a tyre offset on the likes of Verstappen and Leclerc. But obviously he ended up in a ding-dong with Carlos Sainz, which meant he had to pit late on and charge through from the back of the field. And charge through he did with some very impressive, very determined overtakes, and maybe a bit risky. And I think he was told by his engineer to calm down a bit, because obviously the last thing McLaren needed was Piastri to have a crash trying to charge back through the field and the safety car to nullify Norris's advantage at the end. But I think, it being a sprint weekend helped, because Verstappen was never comfortable with his car. The pace was really close in qualifying. I think the heat and the track temperatures as well, it being Miami, just this blended cocktail. You had Red Bull and McLaren and Ferrari all very close in terms of pace. And it did mean that if something like a safety car happened, Verstappen may not come out the victor. So I think let's talk about Red Bull. It was looking like it was going to be another processional weekend for Verstappen. He obviously mastered the difficult conditions in both qualifying sessions to take both poles. In the sprint, he did well to just break the DRS of Leclerc and just keep him at a distance to win that one. But then obviously, yes, as we've said, he hit the bollard because he said he didn't like the look of it and he wanted to test his front wing, which was a very funny, one of many funny quips from him in the post-race press conference. And he also got a little bit, I think you can see in video footage, he does nick the back of his floor a little bit. Whether that made a difference, I'm not sure. He was losing about 2 to 3 tenths in the first sector to Norris, lap after lap, and he admittedly just conceded to defeat and settled for second. But all in all, a very good weekend again for Verstappen and Red Bull, I think, and I imagine you agree with me. But it shows that they are, unlike last year, they can be vulnerable.
Yeah, I think Verstappen put it kind of perfectly when he said that on the weekends where you can't fight for the win, you need to bag the most points you can, and he still came out that weekend with the most points of any driver because of his sprint win and extended his championship lead over Sergio Perez. So all in all, good weekend for Verstappen. As I put out earlier, uncharacteristic mistake, but in the grand scheme of things, didn't cost him too much. I think McLaren just had the fundamentally faster package, and that came down to Red Bull and Verstappen not nailing the setup. And it kind of had similarities to Brazil 2022, where Verstappen never, was in that optimal window on setup in the Red Bull. And although the sprint kind of, disguised those shortcomings, the actual Grand Prix distance exposed them. And I said to you when we were in Miami that I think although Red Bull's advantage has been slashed this season, it does kind of it backs up Christian Horner's comments throughout last year that Red Bull, because of how good the car is, they're not getting the credit they deserve for maximising their weekends, because this race showed that when Red Bull don't get it right, as you said, they're vulnerable. People can get at them, and McLaren brought their upgrade this weekend, estimated to be about 4 tenths worth of improvement, which is quite a lot these days to find that when the regs are so matured. And you've got Ferrari bringing upgrades at Imola. They've not brought a single upgrade this year, and they were still, in the ballpark with Verstappen this weekend. So if Ferrari's Imola upgrades deliver and McLaren continue the kind of route they're on towards the top, I think we're going to see some great freeway battles between now and the end of the season, hopefully.
Yes, I think it's very promising now that we've had 6 Grand Prix weekends and we've had 3 different winners and three different teams as well. I think that's the most important thing. We've had a Red Bull on the top step, a Ferrari on the top step, and a McLaren on the top step at this early stage, a quarter of the way in. of this mega long season. So much better than having to wait till Singapore for a different car on the top step. I think that was around 16 last year. So yes, almost seismic difference to last season. There is a little bit of hope that I think Verstappen is going to win the championship, and I don't think anybody's going to be able to stop him, but we should have a few more surprises along the way. Or not surprises, because we now know that the McLaren and the Ferrari are pretty quick. Those are definitely the top three teams now. And as George Russell put it after Sunday, Mercedes are the fourth fastest team. Another so-so weekend for them. The sprint was obviously just a bit of a write-off for them. And the Grand Prix itself, things looked a little bit better. I think Hamilton had a fun little punchy drive. And he was a bit more optimistic than George after the race and was basically saying, what's the point of saying we're the fourth fastest team, essentially? He came through to sixth, Russell finished eighth. And that's basically just where they are.
Yeah, it speaks volumes that Mercedes coming sixth and eighth. In Total's media session, there wasn't kind of, these questions about being doom and gloom or like a disaster. It's just accepted now that is where they are. They look comfortably ahead of Aston Martin, especially in race trim, but against the top three, Red Bull, Ferrari, McLaren, they've taken a step back. They've not actually cut the gap. Obviously, McLaren have brought upgrades, as I said. Ferrari are bringing upgrades. Red Bull won't stand still. Mercedes have got things to come, but when you look at how their correlation has been recently, especially with the W15, how can you take it seriously that they will, find those improvements? It's doubtful. I think it is a crisis now for Mercedes. They say they kind of know where they're going with the car. They've had to, have these tough moments to realise it, but we've heard that so much through the last 3 seasons now that they've pinpointed where they've gone wrong and what they have to do, and we're still waiting for that moment. I think Hamilton being more upbeat is a case of he knows he's not fighting for anything this season and he's just enjoying the fights that he does have. Whereas for George, it's rare to see George so downbeat after a race weekend. Usually he's very upbeat, kind of toes the party line of, things will get better, we got things coming. Whereas this weekend, every kind of media session that we spoke to him, he was quite flat, deflated, and I think it's kind of resonating with him that Mercedes won't be in a position to fight for probably wins this season and potentially not even next season ahead of the next regulation change.
Yeah, I think it was pretty telling that he gave Ed Sheeran, who was one of the many celebrity guests in Miami, which obviously won't be a surprise to anyone. He said after giving Ed Sheeran a hot lap on Saturday that he enjoyed that more than qualifying. So that sums up where George Russell's head's at the moment. So bless him. It's a struggle for Mercedes, and I think they brought a revised floor to Miami as well, didn't they?
Yes, they did. That was kind of step one of their upgrade, and then more to come, I think, at Imola.
Yeah, it needs to be plenty more to come because it didn't really elevate their position. But McLaren took that step, didn't they? And Ferrari looked to have sort of got their act together. Ferrari have got they're going to have their turn to have a big upgrade next time out in Imola, and I think Miami, for me, proves that if they can do something similar to McLaren, we could end up with an even tighter fight at the front. Leclerc was more confident after being close to Verstappen in the sprint race. Carlos Sainz, if it wasn't for the ill-timed safety car in Ferrari's perspective, Fred Vasseur said they forgot the crystal ball. If it wasn't for the safety car intervention, Sainz could have picked up his second Grand Prix win of the season. We've got teams like Mercedes who aren't sure what the direction they're heading. Well, they're sure of their direction they're heading in, but they're not really motoring along it very fast. And then we have teams like Ferrari and McLaren who are really putting in the necessary steps to catch up with Red Bull.
Yeah, when Horner said at the start of the season that Red Bull were encountering diminished returns under this regulation cycle, we kind of all scoffed at that claim, and especially when Red Bull revealed some revolutionary change to their car for this year. But it does actually seem now that McLaren and Ferrari have more scope to improve than Red Bull do. It obviously remains to be seen. Red Bull could end up taking a big step if they tap into this potential of this new kind of revised concept. But yeah, I definitely think McLaren and Ferrari are chopping at Red Bull's heels now, and are in a position where, as Vasseur said, if they get things right on a weekend, they'll put Red Bull under pressure. And I think it's so promising for Ferrari as well that without any upgrades this season, they've still been in a position where they will kind of match him Verstappen both on race pace and degradation in Miami. That's not to say upgrades always deliver a step forward. That's why I think kind of the term updates is used more commonly than upgrades now, because teams can't be certain that their updates will work. But Ferrari have got a good history with correlation. They've put a lot into this Imola package. I think they're expecting big things from it. They've been testing it at Fiorano both today and tomorrow. So when we go to Imola, let's see how much of a step forward they've made. I think their main weakness remains slow speed corners, and with Monaco coming up, that's a circuit where, as history has shown, if you qualify on pole, you're very hard to beat. So I think that's one race that Ferrari will be pinpointing as one that they can capitalise on and take advantage of Red Bull maybe not being at their strongest. But if Ferrari haven't got on top of this slow speed weakness, then who knows, maybe McLaren or some, even Mercedes, or Aston Martin. It's a kind of a free-for-all at Monaco when the gaps are so tight, could take advantage. So I think Monaco's definitely going to be a very exciting weekend this year in qualifying with the team, like the pack so close over one lap and multiple teams bringing upgrades.
Yeah, you talk of Aston Martin sort of taking advantage. Fernando Alonso feels like potentially he's being taken advantage of. Heading into the weekend, he didn't really fancy Aston Martin's chances, and as it turned out, they really did struggle, even in qualifying, which is a surprise considering Alonso's prowess over one lap this year. I think for the Grand Prix, he only qualified 15th, and Stroll also, he didn't make it into Q3 either. But Alonso had a gripe with the race stewards. On the start of Saturday's sprint, we had a little sort of kerfuffle where Hamilton dove down the inside of turn one, maybe from a distance. He didn't make contact with anyone. Alonso and Stroll had already touched, and that sent Stroll into Norris, and there was a whole kerfuffle there. Hamilton wasn't punished for that incident, and Alonso suggested it was because he wasn't Spanish. And he was very angry about that and decided he wanted to talk to FIA President Mohammed Ben Sulayem to protect the future generation of Spanish drivers. Remarkably, Alonso wasn't sort of punished for making a quite sort of negative remark towards the stewards about bias, which maybe you could say that could be punished, but So first of all, what do you make of Alonso's complaints? And second of all, what do you make of Aston Martin's pace? Because Alonso was able to recover to a points finish in the end, helped by the safety car. Interesting weekend for them.
Yeah, I think I take Alonso's words with a pinch of salt, really. I think it's... he has this way where he's very selective with what he says to the media. He's very cunning. We know that, both on the racetrack and off the racetrack. And I think, regardless of whether he believes it or not, I think he's planted that to try and, instigate a turning of the tide within how steward indecisions are made. Maybe his hope is that by saying that, they might be more lenient to him in future decisions. In terms of the incident, I think it was a typical turn one incident. I mean, Hamilton was very, very late on the brakes, and as we saw on Sunday, when you are braking on that inside line where there's not a lot of grip, as Perez showed, contact pretty much is inevitable. Perez came very, very close to touching Verstappen. Even Max thinks he, had a bit of a dent on his, or a bit of a mark on his diffuser. So yeah, it was very bold from Hamilton. I think he did that kind of knowing that it's a short race. The Mercedes hasn't really got the pace in general, let alone the pace to overtake in a straight line. So he was trying to make up places on lap one. But if you look at the actual footage, I know Alonso was already, he said that Hamilton being there kind of forced him to steer out. But before Hamilton's kind of even really arrived, he's heading towards Stroll. So I think it's just one of those, it's a tight turn one. Those things can happen. We saw in the race there was kind of close contact at turn one, so I can see why the FI didn't penalise it. Hamilton probably more to blame than anyone else, but I don't think it was a clear cut decision where it was a slam dunk penalty. Aston Martin's pace, yeah, it's a strange one. I know they expected to struggle, but for them, struggling still should mean being the fifth placed team. And RB were quicker this weekend. You could argue Haas were quicker as well. Alonso, he didn't have any pace. I think he said it was one of his worst weekends in a while, and you have to agree with that because he was fortunate to get out of Q1. He was 100th away from being knocked out by Bottas, and that was on pure pace. He then was slowest in Q2, so whether he didn't nail the setup or what, he just wasn't comfortable in the AMR24. He was shown the way by Stroll, which is very, very rare. In the race about to recover, and I think he'll kind of take those 2 points, knowing that Aston Martin are likely to finish fifth in the championship this year anyway, so it doesn't really matter what points they get. It's just about kind of the journey they're on, and he'll be hoping that the upgrades they bring, potentially to Imola, do, get them close to those top four.
Yes. And Stroll was 17th in the race, so faded into obscurity, but perhaps impacted harshly by the safety car. You said there, RB and Haas, arguably better than Aston Martin and Miami. I think we can definitely say that for RB. They definitely looked like they had quite a quick car, and it was a tale of two halves for their drivers. We saw Daniel Ricciardo qualify fourth for the sprint, and he held fourth in the sprint race as well. So it was a remarkable turn of form for the Australian, who's obviously struggled to get to grips with life back in Formula One as a full-time driver, but it looked like the tide was really changing for him, and he was, full of buoyancy and positive attitude. And I think we really saw a glimpse of the old honey badger, as it were. But then things unravelled for him in the race situation as he failed to get out of Q1 for Grand Prix qualifying. And then, as he sort of said, the RB is a quick car, but it's not a quick enough car to charge back through the field. So he didn't progress very far at all. He had to start from the back of the grid as well on Sunday due to his penalty from China, and he managed to get to 15th. So a so-so weekend for Ricciardo, but I think there's positives there that he qualified well in the sprint. He got a really good sprint result. He's got a bunch of points. So I think he can overall leave Miami happy. Then Yuki Tsunoda put in a great performance in the race, finishing in 7th place. And he obviously took the baton from Ricciardo after the sprint to make sure that RB has firmly entrenched itself as the 6th fastest team. And they also had a fun livery that we saw at a very peculiar livery launch at a car wash in downtown Miami. But yeah, what did you make of RB overall?
Yeah, they kind of solidified their position as the 6th fastest team, or 5th fastest if Aston Martin happened to stumble, which I think is about where they kind of expected to be and what they're aiming for this season. Ricciardo, as you said, kind of back to his best a little bit. We had kind of a glimpse of that, and it was nice to see him be so buoyant and ecstatic to be running at the front again. He drove a flawless sprint, kind of 2 sessions. His lap in qualifying was really good. 1 shot, nailed it, got P4, capitalised on those who didn't put their laps together like Norris and Sainz. And then he went up to 3rd at the start. Obviously, understandably lost the 1 place to Perez in the sprint. And then he kept cycling to bay, made no mistakes. And yeah, fully deserved P4. But although it's progress for him and a step forward, it is another hit to him that on his best weekend so far this season, he still gets outscored by Tsunoda, because Tsunoda, despite having a poor sprint qualifying, RB only sent him out for 1 run, which kind of cost him, and he went down in P15. He made a great start and managed to salvage that last point. And then in the sprint, in the actual main race, he did similar. This time he qualified well, got into the top 10, made another good start, capitalised on the safety car. And although that did help him to get up into his finishing position, he had the pace as well. He pulled away from Russell in the second stint after the safety car, so you can't say it wasn't deserved. And once again, he's just showing that he's maturing into a really, really strong driver. We've seen earlier in the week Honda saying they want to continue their relationship with him. Honda are partnering with Aston Martin from 2026. Depending on how long Alonso goes or how long Stroll wants to stay in F1 for, Tsunoda's looking like an enticing proposition for Aston Martin, because he's really kind of stepping up and showing he's ready to take that next step and maybe be with the top team. Still some question marks over his consistency and his temperament and how he would adapt to that like a top team environment. But in terms of what he's delivering for RB, they can't be happy with it. And I'm sure that with Liam Lawson waiting in the wings, he's proven that he deserves to belong in F1, and I'm sure RB are desperate to keep him.
Yes, I think China was definitely a flash in the pan in in the negative aspect for Tsunoda. I think he bounced back very well in Miami, and hopefully it should continue. He's definitely looking to be a more mature driver as well after his outburst in Bahrain set a negative tone to start the season. He's recovered well from that as well. Moving on to Haas, wow. They had an eventful Miami, particularly on Kevin Magnussen's side of the garage. But quickly, we should mention Nico Hülkenberg, who again was impressive in qualifying. 2 Q3 appearances in each of the qualifying sessions, points in the sprint that he sort of benefited from Kevin Magnussen's defensive tactics, which got him in a lot of trouble and caused a lot of talk in the paddock. So in the sprint, 2 Haas's sort of, running in tandem, Magnussen in the DRS of Hülkenberg, and it looked like they were going to pick up the final 2 points paying positions in the sprint, but then Hülkenberg broke the DRS by cutting the chicane, in Magnussen's words, and then Magnussen was tasked with defending to ensure that Hülkenberg got points for the team, and Magnussen did so by racking up several penalties for poor driving, essentially. Gaining the advantage illegally, running drivers off track. I think he accumulated, 35 seconds worth of time penalties in the sprint, and picked up a handful of penalty points as well on his super license. And then in the race, quickly, Hülkenberg, he sort of faded out of the points position and finished 11th. And Magnussen again got in trouble, this time for tagging Logan Sargent at turn 3. And that's what triggered the all-important safety car that helped the likes of Norris. And that tag with Sargent got Magnussen another 2 penalty points. So he's up to 10 now of his 12 permitted penalty points before he misses a Grand Prix. Andreas Stella's already calling for him to miss a Grand Prix for unsporting-like driving. And Magnussen himself said he didn't even enjoy driving like he did in the sprint. And then after the Grand Prix race itself, he was very downbeat, very short answers, and just wanted to be out of there. I think Hülkenberg's not really worth a discussion. We know he did well. He got everything he probably could out of the car, qualified well. But Magnussen, I think, is definitely worth a discussion. Let's hear your thoughts.
Yeah, where to begin? We've never seen a driver get a race ban since the penalty points came into effect. Gasly came close, I believe, in 2022, right for his Alpine move, but he didn't quite hit the 12 for the rolling 12-month period. But I think it's inevitable now that Magnussen will get a race ban. I mean, his first points came in Saudi Arabia early this season. So he's got to do another 18-odd rounds and 4 sprints without getting 2 penalty points. I mean, it's so easy to pick up even just 1 penalty point for a minor infraction. There's not a chance in my mind that Magnussen gets through that period. And also, I think, regardless of how long he goes without getting the ban, that's definitely going to be on his mind for the coming races. And although he's quite a resolute mental figure, I think that will be on his mind and it will weigh him down and it will affect his driving. And when he's already struggling to be a match for Hülkenberg, who's producing consistent Q3 appearances and gaining and scoring points, that's not going to help Magnussen's cause. And I think he will just about keep his seat for next year purely because Hülkenberg's going to Sauber ahead of that Audi venture. And with Behrman looking like he's going to get the second seat at Haas with 6 FP1 sessions this season starting at Imola, I imagine Haas will want that continuity, so that Magnussen probably will end up keeping his seat. But with someone like Bottas on the market, I think Magnussen should be wary that it's not a guarantee that he will remain in F1, despite him wanting to remain at Haas. I can understand some of his antics in the sprint. Obviously, Hülkenberg had cut the chicane and they'd lost DRS on each other, so Magnussen was vulnerable to Hamilton, and at that point he was trying to play the team game, help Hülkenberg get away and score points. But there comes a point where it is taking the mick, and I think it's wrong that a driver adopts the mentality of, oh, my race is over, so it doesn't really matter how many points I get, because as we've seen, he's now at risk of missing a whole race weekend, and that will be a blemish on his record. He's been known as a hard racer since he entered F1, but getting a race ban for so many infringements is a whole new kettle of fish. And then in the Grand Prix, the Sargent one at the time, I said it was 50-50, or well, more to Magnussen, but I don't think it was worthy of a penalty. And the reason is, although Magnussen never had, the position at either turns 1 or turns 2, with the nature of the circuit and how it kind of wides round into turn 3, Magnussen didn't really have anywhere to go. He could have backed out, but at the same point, it's just the way how the circuit flows. He was on the same line that he'd created for himself through the cutback at turns 1 and turns 2, and then it just so happened that at turn 3 the circuit kind of pinched at the apex, and it wasn't as if he was miles back from Sargent at turn 3 and he's tried to dive at the inside and they made contact. He's just kind of kept his car on the same line that it was, continued at the same speed, and they just come together. So I think in some ways he was kind of unfortunate to receive a penalty for that. Sargent was completely blameless, but that doesn't mean that Magnussen was entirely to blame. So from that one, if he feels aggrieved by that one, I could understand why. But as he said in the sprint, he kind of served all his penalties. And yeah, now he's walking a tightrope for the next few races. And I imagine that sooner or later we will see Ollie Behrman making his second F1 appearance, even though he's not got a full-time seat.
Yes, I think it definitely needs. I think it needs to happen, the race ban, not because I think, let's punish Magnussen. I think it just for the credibility of the point system, it has to happen. It can't be now that the stewards, we see that they don't he gets into incidents but somehow doesn't get penalty points. I think that would make a mockery of the system. So I think as long as the stewards remain consistent in punishing errors, then there's definitely going to be a race ban. And it'd be very interesting to see how he comes back from that. And again, I think it'd be interesting because Haas, as a team, I think need to be responsible as well. They instructed him in Jeddah to be defensive. I imagine they instructed him again. He said he was playing the team game to be defensive in the Miami sprint. So what's to stop them, once the slate's been cleaned after a race ban, to just get him racking up penalty points again if the the necessity arises. In terms of the Sargent clash, I think the penalty is justified personally. I think he should have backed out. He knows that Sargent's ahead of him. He knows the flow of the circuit, like you mentioned. I think he knows that if he's just jamming his car in there, that they're going to come together. He has more awareness of the situation as well, because Sargent is probably unsighted, and we hear that on the team radio. He's not even sure if he's done anything wrong, which I think we'll come to shortly. That maybe speaks to a wider issue of Logan, but yes. Let's come to that now, actually. Let's talk about Williams. They didn't really have that great a weekend, bless them. The pace in the car just wasn't there. There was lots of talk about Logan Sargent's future, whether this could be his last home Grand Prix, and there's talk of someone requesting that Kimi Antonelli gets his super license ahead of his 18th birthday, which would mean he would be eligible to race in F1 before his birthday towards the end of August. So it looks like there's definitely some machines whirring in the background to maybe unsettle Sargent, who again, I mean, the car, James Vowles' response to the rumours of Antonelli taking a Williams seat ahead of time was that he's got more things to worry about than the driver lineup. And on the evidence of Williams' performance in Miami, he's right. The car just isn't quick. And Albon was a despondent figure at the end of pretty much every session and during sessions on the radio as well. Just complaining about the car. But yes, Sargent on the radio after he had his tangle with Magnussen asked if he did anything wrong. You could just say, "Oh, that's because he was unsighted and he's not sure." But there's definitely, I think, a confidence issue. Personally, that's what I think, and that maybe stems from obviously Australia. And he hasn't taken that step on from his rookie year. There's no evidence that he has. He's inconsistent across sessions. He can't match Albon's pace. And the writing's on the wall for him.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. When he's asking if he's done something wrong on the radio, that is a sign of a driver who is void of confidence and scared to make an error, which I think kind of speaks volumes that he knows he's on borrowed time. I think it's a matter of he might get the whole season, but it looks like Williams are angling to maybe get Antonelli in that seat. Wolf's a bit more, cautious on that. He said again on Sunday that that Antonio's got an F2 campaign to focus on, and they don't want to, burn him by putting him in an F1 seat prematurely and then, not reaping the full reward of his potential. But yeah, Sargent, as you say, he's just he has flashes. I mean, in qualifying, he's a 10th off Albon, which it's not bad. Like when Vowles is saying that Albon's putting championship winning drives during his time at Williams. He's not a championship winning caliber driver, but he has those moments where he's a very, very strong driver, and he's probably out in that upper tier of midfield drivers in F1. If you're then 10th of him, that's not a bad effort. But the problem for Sargent is that he doesn't do that consistently enough. He has then these moments where he'll either crash the car, or he'll be like half a second adrift, and it's just getting that because he doesn't seem to be able to drive to the limit enough without overstepping it. It's either he drives to the limit and nails it, or he goes over that limit, and too often it's over that limit, and he can't seem to bring that back in a little bit to avoid those incidents and maintain a good level of pace. So yeah, I mean, he's got 3 home races this year. It remains to be seen whether he lasts until his second one of this season in Austin and then Las Vegas later in the year. But I wouldn't at all be surprised if Williams replaced him mid-season with the way things are going.
Yes, I certainly wouldn't be surprised either if Logan Sargent doesn't make it to the end of the year. Should we talk about perhaps what is our favourite team, in sarcastic terms, Sauber, considering we sometimes give them a bit of a bashing on the pod. A fairly just, routine weekend for them. They're not a quick car, they're not a quick team, so they don't really get a look in at the points. I would say the most exciting thing that happened with Sauber this weekend is that Valtteri Bottas got his engineer changed ahead of the weekend, and he wasn't really sure why. Wasn't really communicated to him that the change was happening very effectively, and he didn't seem entirely happy about it, and it reaped the benefit of him basically blocking Piastri in sprint qualifying. So it doesn't look like Bottas is going to be there next year because they've signed Nico Hülkenberg, and they're now fishing for a top driver, the likes of Sainz. So Bottas might have to look elsewhere, but I think judging on how things have been going with Sauber, that he might be quite happy with that. How did you judge their weekend and Bottas's overall mood?
Yeah, Bottas in the press conference on Thursday was the very typical wanting to, have a moan and show frustration, but also trying his best to keep professional, knowing that he obviously wants to, pen an Audi seat for next year and the following years. It was quite clear to tell that he's not happy with the decision, and I think he knows deep down that he's on his way out. Sauber have signed Hülkenberg for next year, and they've admitted that Sainz is their top target. So Bottas and Joe obviously aren't at the forefront of their minds when it comes to their drivers for next year, and it's understandable why. Bottas has been good this season, but he seemed to have performed when the pressure for contract renewal was on. Last year he was pretty anonymous and Joe was matching him more often than not, whereas this year Bottas has been head and shoulders above his teammate. But I think it's a case of too little too late. In general, Sauber's weekend, it was like a step backwards for me relative to the rest. Australia, China, Japan, they had the pace to potentially score points on another day. China, they got 2 cars into the top 10 in sprint qualifying. They had genuine pace there, and in Japan and Australia, they had race pace that they didn't maximise because of their slow pit stops. Whereas this weekend, they never really looked in contention for any sort of points. It was just a really quiet weekend for Sauber, and they are now only one of 2 teams to have not bagged points because Alpine finally got off the mark.
Yes, they did. Should we touch on Alpine quickly then? I just remembered we didn't. Esteban Ocon, yes, picked up a point, 10th in the weight-reduced Alpine. I think a good step forward for them, but in terms of a works team, this is my summary, they shouldn't be in this position in the first place, and the fact that they're destined to get a maximum of 6th in the Constructors, and maybe not even that, because the RB does look good. It's not a great situation for them still, but pleased for Ocon that he got the team off the mark.
Yeah, I mean, it's, as you say, they're not really striving for much higher than 6th this year, and even that's a push with RB banging a good lot of points this weekend. But it's a confidence boost at the end of the day. I mean, Alpine, when they've had such a disastrous start to the season, you kind of take any little positives you can get. And Ocon's continuously chipping away at those results, and he's got his rewards, and he's showing why, if science doesn't accept the Alpine proposal that he's reportedly got on the table, Ocon's a good backup option for them, and I think he'd be a really good fit alongside Hulkenberg for that seat. He got out-qualified by Gasly for the first time this season, but he did say he was losing about 10th and a half because of an engine cutout during qualifying, so that would have put him on the fringes again into Q3, which is quite an achievement considering the car that Alpine have got. They did look more competitive in Miami. The two drivers had a good scrap on the first lap that Gasly won. I think Ocon then capitalised on the safety car to get his way into the point. And he had a really good battle with Alonso, actually. He made a great overtake into turn 17, late on the brakes on Alonso at the start of the race. And then they kind of duelled on the safety car restart. It was one of the only proper clean battles we had where a driver wasn't ramming another driver off the road, which is quite ironic considering the history that Ocon and Alonso had during their time at Alpine, particularly 2022, when they couldn't seem to stop crashing into each other when they were on the same piece of tarmac. But yeah, it was nice to see. They took a selfie at the end as well, so obviously any rivalry between them's kind of, water under the bridge. Yeah, Ocon, great drive, good pace, good battles, all in all Alpine. They're not something to celebrate, as Ocon said, but step in the right direction, because in general they were more competitive.
Yes, 100%. And I think, I think it speaks volumes of Alpine overall that we almost forgot about them. Two, you mentioned there about battles. A lot of the battles, you're right, because of how difficult it was to overtake, a lot of drivers were just taking to running cars wide, miles off the racing line or even into the runoff. And yes, it was nice to see Alonso and Ocon, they raced hard, but they raced fair. And it was, as you say, it was ironic. After the race, Alonso not only congratulated Alpine, his former team, on scoring their first points and said he was happy for them, he also heaped a bunch of praise on Ocon and for his hard style of racing, and said how he enjoyed the battle. So, definitely water under the bridge. One more thing on Alpine. They have a new technical boss, David Sanchez, after his glittering stint at McLaren that lasted all but 5 minutes. What do you think the impact's going to be there? Seismic or not much?
It's difficult to say, really. Alpine have kind of, gone to a three-pronged technical structure in response to McLaren's revival last season. Whether, Alpine have the resource, they can maximise their resource, and whether they have, the know-how to make it work like McLaren did, I'm very sceptical. It kind of seemed like a sensible fit as soon as Sanchez left McLaren and they let him go with no gardening leave because it was a mutual agreement that he was too senior for the role, which we've covered before, saying that's a bit strange because surely the two would have cooperated on what his role would be prior to his arrival. But regardless, Alpine, they had the technical director and head of aerodynamics both resign after Bahrain. So it made sense when someone like Sanchez on the market. He's had experience with Ferrari and with McLaren in his first in there. So he's a household name really in the technical world. And Alpine needed someone that could come in there, and he gets to start work immediately. I think there's always a lag period on these kind of appointments. You always see it when someone comes into a team, the turnaround's never immediate. Alpine would have had things in the pipeline, especially upgrade-wise, for a number of months. So anything that comes in these coming weeks and months won't be the Sanchez effect. It'll be more what Alpine do towards the end of the year and into next year that we really see how much of an impact Sanchez has had.
Yes, and talking of impact and technical chiefs and stuff like that, we also have the fact that Adrian Newey's leaving Red Bull after the first quarter of 2025. And there's lots of speculation about where he'll go. Will he just go off and sail boats and enjoy retirement? Or will he go to Ferrari? It's a big hole left to fill in terms of Red Bull, but I think they've sort of responded by signing a lot of their leading technical staff to long-term contracts. So I imagine they should be able to continue fine without Newey. But if Newey does go somewhere else, I think it's going to be Ferrari. I think a lot of people think it's going to be Ferrari, and that could be a massive boost for them. Quickly, let's get your thoughts on that. And then what I'm going to ask you, Taylor, is moving to Imola next weekend, if Verstappen doesn't win, who's your pick for race winner? So those 2 questions for you there.
So on Newey, I agree with you. I think it looks, if he's going to go to another team, it would be Ferrari. I do think that he will take a break. That's kind of the inkling we hear from the paddock, is that he's a bit burnt out and he wants to take a well-earned break because he's been at it. Although he has kind of stepped away at points and it's kind of been more of a consultant role, you'd have to argue. He still has been full on, thrown himself into the Red Bull cars, and I think the time's come now for him to have a break and focus on other projects. But I don't think he's done with Formula One, because why would you have your lawyers negotiate an early release clause if you were completely done with F1? You just have the gardening leave kind of set for what it was based on his contract. Aston Martin, it looks like he's turned that down. Williams has shown an interest, but that's more a long-term project. It's not going to be a place where he can deliver success in the short term. McLaren seem happy with their technical team. Norris has challenged McLaren to show why they don't need someone like Newey, which, yeah, I mean, with the trajectory that they're on at the moment, you can't really argue against that. And Ferrari have wanted Newey for years. There's been like 2 or 3 occasions where Newey's turned them down, most notably 2014 when Horner says Newey came within half an hour of leaving. But I think the time for Newey to join Ferrari is right. I think Fred Vasseur has cultivated an atmosphere there that would work with Newey's approach. The rumours we're hearing are a super consultant role, whereby Newey wouldn't be obliged to attend every race or even attend the factory on a consistent basis. So it wouldn't, although he might need to, relocate partly to Italy, he wouldn't have to do a full-time move, and he wouldn't have to be present every day at the factory. So although it would be an impact on his life and his livelihood, it wouldn't be the seismic one that it could have been like 10 years ago. So I think Newey at Ferrari is a fit that works best for both parties. It would be so exciting to see a team with Vasseur at the helm, a controlled, measured head, the brains of Newey. Then you've got the technical team that Ferrari have put together, led by Enrico Cardile as the technical director. And then on the driver front, you've got probably the strongest lineup in F1, providing Hamilton, recaptures his best form. Leclerc alongside Hamilton is a mouth-watering lineup that, providing the car is right and they don't run into each other all the time, is a championship contending lineup. So yeah, I think Newey to Ferrari looks like it will happen. It just depends whether Newey wants to remain in F1, which, as I said, by the way the contract's been negotiated with his leave from Red Bull, it looks like he does want one final crack with another team. On to Imola. I'm going to tip Norris for the win if Verstappen doesn't. Norris has had such a good track record at Imola. He's got 2 podiums there in 2021 and 2022. He's very, very quick there. The cooler conditions might catch Ferrari out with the warm-up issues. If it is, this time of year at Imola, it usually is quite cool. There's a prospect of rain. And there are some slow speed sections on the track, which if Ferrari's upgrades haven't fully solved those, that might take them out of the running. But I think Red Bull, provided they get the setup right on their car, which more often not they do, Verstappen will still be your number one favourite for the win. But I wouldn't be surprised to see Norris and Leclerc and Sainz, challenging Perez for that second place.
I agree with you on all fronts regarding Newey. And so this is why I added the caveat, if Verstappen doesn't win, because I think he's odds-on favourite. But I'm going to go slightly different from you, and I know you mentioned obviously reasons why it probably won't work for Ferrari, but I'll do a hot take if you can consider this one. Is if Verstappen doesn't win, I'm putting my chips down on Ferrari's upgrades doing the business and Leclerc ending his win drought in front of the Tifosi. Whether that's a logical guess, maybe not, but maybe it's more of an emotional one, because a Ferrari win in Italy would be very, very nice. So I think that's a good place to end on a positive note after a positive weekend of Formula One action. So thank you, listeners, for joining us, and thank you, Taylor, for joining me. Make sure you keep up to date with Motorsport Speak on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or on YouTube, wherever you wish to come and find us. Also, keep up to date with motorsportweek.com and Motorsport Monday, our free-to-read digital magazine. And follow us on socials at Motorsport Week on X, formerly known as Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. But yeah, that's all from me. That's all from us. Taylor, thank you, and goodbye.